So, yeah, it's my great pleasure to welcome Amy Kurzweil, whose work I've been a fan of for a very long time. And I was very thrilled to learn that she was actually physically in Berlin, even though this event ended up being a virtual one. But it was very nice to get to know her. Let me tell you a little bit about the story behind this conversation. And I'll start with my part. I'm based at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development, and I started the Center for Humans and Machines here in 2019. Center that has now grown to almost 30 researchers and support staff. And we're interested, as the name suggests, in the relationship between humans and machines, and we use science as our main kind of vehicle for exploring this relationship. My research has been always done with some interest in public engagement as well. And one of the previous projects that I've been involved in is the Moral Machine Project, which some of you may be familiar with, which it aims both to collect data about public opinion, but also to engage the public in a conversation about AI ethics, like for example, on what moral principles should we program autonomous vehicles to handle unavoidable accidents. So I've always had this interest in science communication and public engagement, in addition to doing the science itself. And I also had, as a hobby, an interest in urban sketching in general. And it's something that I taught myself. This is a sketch of myself and my pregnant wife at the time, and our small daughter when we first moved to Berlin in 2019. And so basically there's a combination of my interest in art and sketching, the lockdown caused by the corona pandemic, and my fascination with the New Yorker cartoon as a format for engaging people in complex topics. This has led to a project that I launched earlier this year called Evil AI Cartoons, in which I communicate some of the challenges and the thorny issues related to programming machines that obey ethical principles. And this was in small part inspired also by the work of people like Amy, who have been doing this kind of cartoons herself. So I'd like to now ask her to introduce how she got into this conversation as well in her journey.
Great. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here. Sorry we can't be together in person, but I'm happy to see your little faces in the digital world. So yeah, I want to just say a big thank you to Iyad for inviting me. It's one good thing about social media is that is how we found each other. So happy I responded to his Twitter message, and thank you, Ivan, also for being so helpful in organizing this, and thanks to everyone at the Institute. I'm here in Berlin because of the American Academy in Berlin, and I'll talk a little bit about what I'm here to do. I thought I would just introduce myself as briefly as possible so you understand what I do in addition to writing cartoons about AI taking over the world, so you understand my perspective and sort of how I come at these themes in particular. So the brief history of my cartooning career begins with me as a writer. So like Iyad, I didn't formally study drawing. I taught myself to draw mostly because I was interested in telling a particular story, and I wanted to use images to do that. So on the next slide, you will see the cover of my first book, which is called Flying Couch. And this is a graphic memoir. So to take a departure from AI and technology, this is a graphic memoir about family. And in this case, it's my maternal side. So this book is about 3 generations of women. My mother, who is a psychologist, who was born actually in Germany in 1946 in a displaced persons camp. And it's also about my grandmother, Lily, who I call Bubby, who's a Holocaust survivor who was born in Warsaw, Poland. And the book is also about me, an artist, sort of reckoning with this history. And the book is actually funny. I know that's hard to believe given the given the topics, but humor has always been a way in my family and in my own work that I've dealt with difficult things, whether those difficult things are in the past or in the future. So I started this book when I was an undergraduate. I was quite young and I was quite naive about how much work it would take to write an entire book. This book ended up taking me 8 years to finish, which was a lot longer than I thought. And at the end of 300 pages, which I'd drawn many times, I thought I want to embark on an endeavor that doesn't take me 8 years to finish. So I want to figure out something that I can do that is like a little bit more quick in its deadline. And so on the next slide, you will see my second. This is actually my second New Yorker cartoon. Basically, I have to finally give credit to my partner, Jacob, who not only did he have the idea that I should decide to become a New Yorker cartoonist, and he encouraged me to try that out, which at the time sounded completely improbable and impossible. But I also need to finally give him credit for this particular cartoon, which he claims he came up with. I would say it's more of a collaboration. But Iyad knows that sometimes our partners play a hand in our best work. But basically, I at my partner's prompting and at seeing people around me who were doing this, I decided to try my hand at creating a batch of New Yorker cartoons. A batch is like shorthand for a group of cartoons that you submit to the editor. So this is about I think it was 2015. I spent a whole summer working on single panel cartoons. At the end of the summer, I chose the 10 best. I went to the editor's office in New York. At the time, before the pandemic, you could actually go into the office and talk to the editor, show them your cartoons. And the editor at the time told me that my work was not terrible. That's a direct quote. And then that was praise enough for me to keep going. I think it took me a few months, and then I finally sold my first cartoon, which we will get to, because that was a tech-themed cartoon. So single panel cartooning is one part of my work. And on the next slide, you will see what I'm actually in Berlin working on, which is another graphic memoir. This book is called Artificial, and it's also a family memoir. This book is about the other side of my family. So this is about my father, Ray Kurzweil, who some of you might be familiar with his writing about technology and his inventions. And the book is also about my grandfather, Frederick Kurzweil, who was a musician, a pianist and conductor who was born in Vienna and who fled the Nazis in 1938. And the conceit of this book is my father has been saving these artifacts and writings from the life of his father. And he's taken all of my grandfather's writings and created a chatbot. So it's a sort of simulation. You can engage with this chatbot and it simulates a conversation with my grandfather. And my book explores that project and also explores sort of the personal philosophical questions that come up as I'm exploring this project. In this page, you can see me in the storage unit of things where my father has been saving my grandfather's artifacts. And basically, the book asks the question, how can I get to know somebody who's no longer around, and how does technology sort of facilitate and change that knowing? There's also humor in this book, but no robots taking over the world. And then lastly, on the last slide that I have to share, I'll note that in addition to writing single panel cartoons and working on books that are sort of more personal, I also have this series called Technophilia, which is a graphic essay series in which I embark on these particular adventures that have to do with exploring technological oddities. So this is more of like an explicitly journalistic kind of investigation of different technological things in the world that I'm interested in exploring. So this series is published with The Believer magazine. One issue, I went to rural Vermont to meet the robot Bina 48, who some of you might be familiar with, and I chronicled that adventure. Another, I went to the Museum of Jewish Heritage and interacted with these holographic avatars. And then in the latest one, which this is a panel from, I'm exploring the world of therapy chatbots. So if you want to read about this, just Google technophilia and my name, and it will pop up. So that's basically the overview of what I do with my time. So you see where I'm coming from when we get into the robot cartoons. And I'm just really excited for this conversation because I think Iyad and I are coming at this particular way of engaging with AI and reflecting on AI from really, really different places. But we've come to some similar, I think, stories we want to tell about AI and what we're afraid of and what we're excited about. And so I just think this is a really cool format for a lecture, and I'm excited for it.
Thank you, Amy. So can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so now let me go to the meat, so to speak, of the conversation. So we decided to organize the conversation around 3 different questions. And the rest of it is all in cartoons. The discussion will be discussing cartoons that try to answer these questions. The first question is, when we talk about fear of AI, what exactly are we afraid of? And I think different people are afraid of different things. The second question is, are some fears a projection of our own human inadequacies? And finally, try to end on a happy note and say, is there a happy coexistence with the machines? And some cartoons do explore that. So let's start with the first question. What exactly are we afraid of? And here we'll go through a bunch of cartoons drawn by myself and Amy, and we'll discuss what they mean to us and perhaps what the motivation behind them was. So let's start with the first question, which is the first answer to what are we afraid of, is people are afraid for their livelihood. They're worried that they may have no more jobs. And let's start with this cartoon, Amy, which is about bring your programmer to work day. So can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yes, I think I was sort of playing with this idea of like what exactly is the relationship between an algorithm or like something that plays a role in our work and seems to have its own autonomy, and then the people that create it. And I had this Marvin Minsky quote in my head. Will robots inherit the earth? Yes, but they will be our children. This idea that there's this sort of like I don't know, parent-child bond between robots and humans. And so I riffed on that a little bit with this one. I guess
Yeah.
it's bring your child to work day, but then I just, wanted to blur that parent relationship.
Yeah, like when I saw this, it made me think of another thing that parents have to do with their children, which is that they have to accept that they will rule the earth at some
Mhm.
point differently. Like we all, this is actually an important part of parenthood, that you let the children become their own people and you stop trying to over control them and tell
Mm.
them exactly what to do. And some people don't want to let go, right? So I
Mhm.
fear that I don't know if this is a comforting thought or a disturbing thought, but that we may have to let go at some point and let them
Yeah,
figure it out
and
themselves.
also in this one, that the stand-in for the child in this scene is the programmer, that the programmer is there's an inversion, or the programmer is being configured as the child. And so how will AI treat us when it sees us as this sort of like less evolved
Yeah.
being?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so when I first saw the cartoon, my understanding was different, was the opposite, was that the robot was the child and the programmer was the parent, right? Who's kind of coming to see what the kids are doing, right?
Mhm.
And it's interesting. I don't know, maybe it says something about me that this is how I first interpreted it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the next one. So that's another one of your cartoons, Amy. And it made me think of like,
Can we see the
you may,
caption next?
oh yeah, sorry.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah, so do you want to say something about this? I mean, this for me is like it's an in complete inversion of the automation. You know, normally the machines are the ones making things and we're the ones consuming, but here the humans are kind of making things and the
Mhm.
machines are consuming. So
Yeah.
is that what you wanted to convey?
Yeah, I mean, I think in this first of all, when I submitted this cartoon, the editor at the New Yorker said it's too weird. Like, she was just like, no. But so this was not accepted. But I was thinking about like just closing the loop. You know, I think one of our anxieties about AI is that we render ourselves out of playing a role in the whole cycle. And so if the you know the AI like machine is creating this meat. I think I was eating an Impossible Burger when I, had the idea for this cartoon. So there's a science technology role in the creation of the good, and then the fact that the robots are the ones consuming it, and the fact that the humans are excited about that. I think that sort of was the key for me in this cartoon. That like the humans have created this cycle in which they have rendered themselves obsolete, and I also just thought the robots eating the hamburgers and how unhappy they look and also the absurdity of that. That's sort of like what what was fun for me in drawing this cartoon. These like poor little robots having to eat. Obviously, they don't even enjoy eating. So just the absurdity of this world, I think, speaks to like a anxiety that I have
Yeah.
about AI doing everything for us.
Yeah, perhaps the robots have better taste than us. They need more healthy food.
Mhm.
Okay, so this is a cartoon that I drew recently about this concept that the robots are replacing us not just in the jobs, but eventually they're going to also require maintenance and they're going to go obsolete as well, and they're going to cost us as well a lot as they replace each other. And actually, there's in economics, there's uh, a result, if you like quantitatively, if you ask economists, they would tell you that capital replaces capital more than it replaces labor. So
Mm.
it's
Hmm.
more likely that robots replace other robots than they replace humans, and that's kind of playing on this too. Um,
Mm.
but there
Mhm.
is a sense in which, even now we're kind of like we're defeated and we're lining up for benefits, that they're also competing with us on this. So that's kind of another layer of anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, it's so interesting to me when like the role that the character of the robot plays in these robot cartoons, that we are creating this character that has this really worried look on his face and this anxiety because we need like we need a human character, a human-like character in order to like give shape to what that constant displacement of robots replacing other robots makes us uncomfortable. So we need to create this character in order to embody that discomfort.
Yeah,
And I really like all what this robot has in his pockets. That little detail of the hammer and the ruler and the wrench is like this like graveyard of obsolete machines.
that's right. Yeah, I mean, just like a human can no longer is useless, with their knowledge of these kind of old tools.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So let's move to the next one. This is one of yours
Mhm.
and one of my favorites.
Yeah, the robots are coming for our leisure.
And this is kind of similar point, right? Making a similar point that they're kind of like not only taking our jobs, but they're like taking the comfort that you know, uh, whatever it is that we're comforting ourselves now that we've lost our jobs,
Hmm.
right? Whether it's benefits or like playing golf. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, well, I guess I should say that I had a version of this cartoon or just a different cartoon that I don't like as much, which was these men were in a golf cart drinking beer and the robots were playing golf, and the line was, "It is better. You're right. It is better when the robots play for us." Like, so it's like more of maybe like a positive take on the experience of being automated out of your leisure. But I thought it was maybe more interesting to keep the tension between the humans and the robots.
Yeah.
And I think in this version, what I'm also getting at, or what I was also thinking about, is just the way that automation, again, the character of the robot represents a concept. So how does the concept of AI impinge upon our leisure time. And I feel that way all the time, that, you know, like social media is, for example, is like a present threat to my leisure, or like the fact that I'm about to get an email at any time is a threat to my leisure, and it's something that I struggle with. And so I think I was thinking in that vein when I came up with this one.
Yeah, I for me, like one of the nice details about it also is that the robots are kind of friendly. Like, you know, they're saying hi, they're coming with a smile. They're not really coming, you know, with an aggressive, you know, or like ill intent. It's the people who are not happy with this arrangement. And that also says something about the relationship that some, you know, maybe, you know, we've done some work on human machine cooperation, and we found that people have this suspicion, you know, like they're less likely to cooperate with machines. They're suspicious of their intentions of the machines. And you know, maybe we'll overcome this over time, but for the moment there's this distrust that, you know, look, that smile is like there's something behind that smile, you know, that we can't accept because they're so foreign. We can't accept that they're just here to maybe to help or whatever.
Yeah, the baseball cap isn't fooling anyone.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's move to the next one. And yeah, this one I think is without a caption.
Yeah.
It's one of yours as well.
Yeah.
And for me, it's just, yeah, it evoked this kind of cultural appropriation idea that,
Mhm.
I mean, this is, you know, when the robots are not sentient, it's okay to play like a robot, but if they do become sentient, then will this be no longer acceptable?
Right. Yeah, I do think I originally had a line on this cartoon where the robots were saying like we're being appropriated, but then I thought it was maybe funnier, more subtle when you just came to that conclusion on your own. I mean, I think what's interesting is like I've drawn the robots angry about this, but I think what's really behind this for me is anxiety from a human perspective that we are becoming like robots, or that algorithms are changing the way that we behave and the way that we think and act. And so it's interesting that I've displaced that discomfort onto the robot character when really it's you know it's the human part, the human loss is what I really feel worried about.
Yeah. Okay, so that was the first fear, fear of for or the threat to livelihood. Now we have a threat to peace and security, and this is a really big one. I mean, the you know, there was this Slaughterbot video that was released a few years ago to try and raise attention to autonomous weapons, and there was a follow-up, a new one released just last week, to kind of keep the issue up in the public agenda and political agenda. So this is like a very contemporary issue. Of course, there's existential threats as well. So let's look at those. So for me, so this was a kind of absurd cartoon about robbery by robot. And for me, it was a little bit kind of a little bit just absurd, like pure absurdity. That why would you even need to show up at the bank? If you're a machine, you could just hack things and steal cryptocurrency. But you know, there's a question here of, you know, is this robot acting on its own? Is it a tool that's acting on behalf of like some crime syndicate? So it's acting on behalf of people. You know, that's left kind of unsaid here, or unexplored, or unstated. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it also makes me, the fact that the human is still attached to paper money highlights just the disparity between the, you know, the robot conception of value and the human conception of value.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like a human is not really getting it still, you know, like the game has changed.
I
Yeah.
think most of us don't really understand cryptocurrency still.
Yes, including me.
Yeah.
So the next one is about autonomous weapons too, and here we've got a couple of advanced uh, robotic, like autonomous weapons looking at landmines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of, I mean, part of it is to say that autonomous weapons are not new. You know, landmines are actually autonomous weapons.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't do much, right? They just sit there.
Yeah.
And they're terrifying, like the number of people who die from them is still staggering. It remains a massive problem in international peace. That's about to get much worse. So imagine what these guys on the
I
right
think
can.
this cartoon is so interesting because it really I think what cartoons do at their height is really change your perspective on something, and this really did make me consider that the smartness of autonomous weapons is really important. That the fact that the landmines were these dumb things that just go off, and we have no insight into like the sort of mechanism that makes them go off or not, other than just if someone goes near them. Like they have no other ability to understand whether or not they should go off. But this idea that we can create smart weapons, we don't always think of it that way, but it is a theoretically a positive. And it's not, yeah, I don't have that thought very often. So I really appreciate this cartoon for that reason.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, there's another kind of point here, which is, I mean, these things are always very tricky, right? Like one of the problems with landmines is, so you could say being a dumb weapon is a feature, right? Because it's not like pursuing some victim, like chasing it. There's this Black Mirror episode where there's these robot dogs fitted with machine guns are like chasing people. Like it could be from a previous war, but nobody switched them off. They just keep, they're solar powered and they just keep going, for like 100 years, continuously pursuing people. So there's this kind of like senseless kind of demonic evil about them potentially. But another way of thinking about it is that landmines are very non-discriminant killers. Like you just have to step on them. It doesn't matter if you're a child or an adult or an enemy or a friend. Whereas potentially, and some of the proponents of autonomous weapons actually say that autonomous weapons may be better at discriminating between combatants and non-combatants. So there's even an argument, and I'm not saying that this is an argument that I haven't thought about this long enough to have a position, but there is an argument for ethical use of autonomous weapons if they provably reduce, for example, damage to civilians compared to, let's say, landmines. So this is by no means a simple conversation, right? Or a simple issue. Yeah. Okay, let's move to the next one. One of Amy's.
More autonomous weapons, yes.
So yeah, I love this because I mean there's so many layers to this. So you could just use it as a metaphor for different kinds of discussions that people have with their parents, where their values or nature is contrary to expectations. But you can also read it like as a commentary on autonomous weapons themselves. And I would like to ask you, like, what did you have in mind? Like, what was there one of those intentions that started this cartoon?
Oh man. I mean, this is a trope for New York, you cartoon enough and you come upon these tropes. So they're like, mom, dad, I'm something. And you having interesting characters engage with that trope is a formula that I've used before. And I guess I just thinking about like, well, what would the ultimate autonomous intelligent weapon do? They would not kill. So, that's the next generation of. And I will just say the funnest part of drawing this cartoon was I don't know if you can see, but there's a little family portrait on the wall, and that was fun.
So what's in the
Just to
portrait? Is
imagine.
it
They're
somebody?
just posing together. There's happy family, but about to be disrupted by this huge identity shift. So it's fun to imagine, like in cartoons, just the life beyond the cartoon. I think that's a fun feature of doing this work, is just living in the world where autonomous weapons like have families for a second. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and I think there's nothing to prevent this like from being a reality, right? Like I mean, that's a very long-term question, but if machines do become some kind of, sentient, then they should in principle face the same existential
Right.
questions we face. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. This one is one I did actually a long time ago and then kind of redid it. And it's about unintended consequences, that even if we program AI with noble goals, for example, I want the AI to minimize misery, it might still figure out the only way to minimize misery is to kill all humans, because humans are miserable by definition, right? So, and this is a cautionary tale about this kind of unintended consequences. I think Stuart Russell always refers to the King Midas story of, wishing that everything he touches turns to gold, and then of course his whole family turns to gold, and all the food turns to gold before it reaches his mouth, and he dies of hunger and loneliness. So it's an old cautionary tale, and
It
this is
also
a
reminds me of the Nick Bostrom paperclip thought experiment.
That's right. Yeah.
Maximizing the creation of paper clips turns everyone into a paperclip. Yeah, I mean, this is just it's very dark and very smart, and it makes me think about like how AI is often an opportunity to reflect on your like deepest philosophical principles about ethics. And this sort of makes me think about, antinatalist arguments for like, you're better off never being born, which I find completely ridiculous and very depressing. But this sort of taps into that. It's like you have to think with AI, you have to think about what your ultimate ethical position is, about what's valuable. And that's a really tall order.
Yes, yeah, I agree. I think that's the thing, because machines are so literal. You have to tell them what you want. You're faced with the realization that, okay, I actually have to figure out what I want. I can't just kind of use my intuition and change my mind halfway and so on, which is something we do all too often. So they're kind of like confronting us with this kind of the existential demand. And this one is fantastic. It's very simple and it's very New Yorker, because it's two people in a bar.
Yeah, I don't know if I need to say much about it. Just, it's definitely, the quintessential New Yorker, people chatting at a bar, but they're robots.
Yeah. I like that they're still going to bars. Like there's lots of bars around. Why destroy them? Like let's make
It's fun. Yeah.
most of them. Yeah. Okay, so let's move to the next threat, and the next threat is the threat to human relationships. And I think this is where it gets kind of a little bit maybe less violent, but more more proximate. So it's more, I would say, near term than some of the others. And I think you have a bunch of cartoons that kind of talked more about like smart devices, social media, and so on. And this is one of them. And I love this kind of the fact that the way that we talk to the machine is kind of like changing the way we talk. So there is a recognizable way in which we talk to the machines, and we start like picking up on it, and we notice when it's used against us. And this goes to this question of like, does interacting with machines change the way we interact with people? It's like an interesting second order effect. Is that what you were
I
exploring?
think also, I mean, I think also I think about my sister-in-law who has 3 children, and when she wants to be sort of firm with her children, she will say, Alexa, set a timer for, like when it's time to go to bed, Alexa, set a timer for 5 minutes. And it's like she can kind of use this sternness with the machine that she maybe doesn't want to use with her children, or maybe it's just this way that we are enabled to talk to machines, I think. Is interesting, and because it's always a command, and what is that constant giving of commands do to us is kind of an interesting question.
Yes, and I think actually it's one of the reasons why we don't have an Alexa at home or a Siri, and it's because we just don't have a need for it. But I think one of the things that people are concerned about is that these chatbots don't answer back. Like you could mistreat them, and they don't have the same kind of like ability to talk back. And the question is, would kids, for example, learn bad habits? It's kind of like an issue that, if you had help at home, like these wealthy families that have, like maids and so on, if they mistreat those people, because these people don't have the same kind of authority over them, does that change the way that they behave with other people as well? So beyond the tragedy of that particular interaction, there's other tragedies. And this one is kind of like maybe the flip side is, and it's about confiding and getting kind of romantically close to the machines. and it's about, maybe there are things we're more comfortable telling machines than we are telling other people.
Yeah, this comes up in the piece that I shared with you about therapy chatbots, and
Yes.
that I mean of course this is a concerning possibility that you might only want to confide in machines, but the idea that a machine can be a place where you unload is actually quite useful to human relationships, just like the way a diary is useful to human relationships.
Yeah, so yeah, you're right. So on one hand, not everybody can afford a therapist, right? But
Mhm.
so in one hand, it's the kind of democratizing access to mental health support, and a lot of people are dealing with loneliness and all sorts of other challenges. So it's a good thing. So you don't want to ban these things. At the
Mhm.
same time, they might take something away from human relationships if they become too much of a substitute. And it's not
Mhm.
clear if they're a substitute or a complement at the moment.
Yeah,
I don't think we know the answer.
I think that's right.
Okay, and this is one of yours. So I love the hat.
It's
Um,
just ridiculous.
I love that they come with the chargers, just in case.
I don't know why I decided to call the smartphone Damien. I just thought that was like a fitting name for a smartphone. Um, yeah, I mean, I do this when there was, and maybe there still is a phase of people switching to flip phones. I think it's just absurd. Again, being a cartoonist, you get to just live in these absurd worlds where people date giant cell phones.
And yeah, soon, I mean, some people are already beginning to date robots,
Mhm.
like humanoid robots, right? I mean, you've seen a bunch of documentaries that had interviewed such cases, and maybe it'll become more prevalent. And then I imagine there would be um, a scenario not so different from this one. Yeah, I love the robot cat Turing test. It's just brilliant. So
Yeah,
what did it is?
I'll just tell you, well, first of all, I have a robot cat, so that's an important thing to know about me. My father bought it for me, of course, and it was a Hanukkah gift a few years ago. I mean, I think that it was sort of a funny gag gift. It's one of those companions for the elderly, and it purrs. Um, and I wouldn't say that I have a very close relationship with it, but it is kind of a fun thing. So that inspired this cartoon. But I will say that like my first vision of this cartoon was extremely complicated and involved me trying to imagine what a Turing test setup would look like for a cat, like actually. So there was like a curtain and somebody behind the curtain, and there was this room that was messy, and it was just so interesting how complicated I was trying to make the cartoon because I was thinking about the Turing test as this complex sort of um, scientific experiment. But actually, the Turing test is not that complicated a scientific experiment. It's very simple. And then what is interesting and funny about cats is the fact that they just sit there. So I got over my sort of intimidation of trying to write a cartoon about the Turing test and just wrote something as simple as possible. And this is what came out eventually after many drafts. So this is really actually a cartoon about cats more than it is about technology.
Yeah, but I think maybe unintentionally, but I think it goes to explores many like deep concepts, and one of them I think is whether passing the Turing test. I mean, passing the Turing test has always been about the eye of the beholder. Like
Hmm.
it's the person who's is interrogating or perceiving the machine is unable to distinguish it from a human. So in a way, it's a way of defining intelligence, right? Or defining what it means to be intelligent. Uh,
Hmm.
and as intelligent as a human, not as an intrinsic property, but as something that we observe. And I think there's a kind of, existential question there, like about what it is, and if it's easy to pass the test this way, then is this all we need? Do we need to care about essence, so to
Hmm.
speak?
Hmm.
So let's move to the next one, and this one I think comes without a caption either. And yeah, could you tell us a bit about the motivation behind this one?
Well, I guess something that I think about a lot in terms of AI is its relationship to animals. And I've thought, um, I don't, you've probably watched these big dog videos from Boston
Yeah.
Dynamics, where I mean now they have these incredibly beautiful dance videos that are amazing. I am obsessed with them. But the early Boston Dynamics videos with Big Dog, this robot that is, you know, supposed to be like helping soldiers in the war, was, you know, there's just like kind of behind the scenes footage of Big Dog, and there's this one where they kick Big Dog and he kind of goes flying, but then he rights himself, and it's supposed to be very impressive. And it's very funny. I always found that demonstration of kicking the robot and he rights himself very funny. And it's related to, I think, why we find cats and dogs and animals, you know, funny, especially when they're doing human things or when they're struggling in some way. There's just like this sense that we are laughing at animals and laughing at robots, and the fact that they don't understand that we're laughing at them is part of the joke. I think is interesting. And I'm like curious about why robots and animals sort of go together in my head. I think it has to do with the fact that they're both alien intelligences. And we really
Yeah.
don't, yeah, we really don't know what they think of what we think of them.
I mean, I another thing that this cartoon got me thinking about is again this, how does the way we treat machines influence the way we treat humans or animals, for example. So, Immanuel Kant basically made this kind of argument about mistreatment of animals leading to mistreatment of humans. This was like, it was very original at the time. Nobody cared about animal welfare at the time. And he was concerned about that. And this, if we do this, if we have like these kind of fight to the death, which by the way is a massive industry apparently. There's like a killer kind of robo wars or something like this. That does this make us more likely to, have like roosters fight with each other or dogs fight with each other? And
Or
it's not clear
human.
whether like human nature, human desire for these things, is the start, or is it something that can be cultivated through machines?
Yeah, it's the classic question of whether or not technology is giving us an outlet for our violence or if it's stoking
Yeah,
more violence. And I think it's obviously doing both, you know.
probably. Okay, and now we have the threat to individual autonomy. So we're still kind of in what we are afraid of. And here, let's start with this one. And I think here the strong theme is predictive technology, this stuff that personalizes things.
Yeah, I guess in this cartoon I was thinking about like what it means to predict something, that prediction is really just about the past, and so the idea that a psychic can tell you your future is very much connected to who you are in the moment. I feel like psychics are not just full of BS. They're they're onto something. It's not mystical, but they're looking at you, and they're making the good ones are making like an educated prediction. And the fact that AI can do that because it understands our present, it knows our future. That's very disturbing and also very interesting. It makes me think about other sort of ways of thinking about how we know the future as humans.
Yeah, it also like highlights to me the fact that we go to psychics, right? Like people go and kind of out of curiosity have a go, and because we're curious about our future, we're curious to see what others read in our faces and so on. And I think in a similar way, we're curious what the machines think of us too. And if they're better, they're more reliable because they're using big data and they're kind of looking at the similarities between us and other people, billions of other people, then that could tell us a lot about ourselves, maybe things we're afraid of. I mean, I like that the guy here is kind of like a little bit worried, like it's kind of, there's a concerned look there. And, there's a question here, like, do we want to know? I think as well is like another question. Like we have this new power, but do we want to use it? Yeah, and this one it kind of plays to the same thing, right? Like that we are being judged by machines in some way, or other
Yeah.
people through the machine.
Well, and just like the collapse of our value into what this tiny little box tells us, and how that's clearly, this could go in the human relationships category too, that it's like you're trying to seek this amalgamated sort of deduction of your value in terms of what social media tells you with how many likes you've gotten, which somehow feels like, because more people are contributing to that evaluation, it feels truer. But like, what about the person who's right there who wants to value you in some way? So I think that's what I was getting at here.
Yeah, and this one kind of takes it to the physical world, right? Like your physical actions, the fact that you grabbed one thing. I mean, one thing is hovering with your mouse over some product or spending more time looking at a specific product before you scroll down. That's one thing. But soon, I think, and that's very much an explicit goal for a lot of advertisers, is to do analytics on your physical behavior in the real world, right? That's what's kind of, you hover over something for 4.5 seconds more. So that basically is going to be pervasive. And again, there's a concerned look, right, by the human.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting. Like the cartooning world allows you to take this absurd thing that's happening in one context and put it in another context that makes clear why it's absurd. Like the idea that people are watching you on your screen, we've almost accepted, but people watching us, what we're doing in sort of physical space is still scarier, I think. But the fact that that is going to infiltrate all of our interactions is quite scary.
Yeah, exactly. Like it makes me feel more that it's just as we gave up our concerns when it comes to like micro behavior analysis online, presumably the same will happen in the physical world, right? And I mean, it's good to see it now, but maybe if it happens slowly, we wouldn't notice, right? Like there's a boiling frog sort of effect. And okay, so this one is kind of similar. This one I did to inspired by my fears for children in the age of robotic toys. It's the idea that the robot toys, I mean, they're very good at manipulating, like algorithms are very good at keeping us, for example, on our phones. But the same algorithms and the same techniques can prevent, in principle, prevent kids from playing outside and developing like physically and socially. So I don't know. I think that we don't really have yet a clear idea about like, what counts as acceptable interaction with a child from a robot, and we don't even have like any standards for holding these things up against.
Right. And the fact that the robot wants to sing advertising jingles is, first of all, not that far-fetched, because the amount of advertisements I have blasted into my ear a day because of my devices. I mean, I think for me, that is the most concerning sort of element of the technological world, is the role that advertising plays in it and how advertising makes it have certain incentives. Like this robot probably doesn't want the girl to go outside because it wants to play her advertising jingles, because that's how the company makes money. So I find that this cartoon very evocative of those anxieties that I have.
Yeah, I should say it's maybe the least funny one that I did. It's more eerie than funny.
Yeah.
Um, and this one again is about children. Again, not playing with the puzzle, but um, did you, by the way, just curious, is the imaginary friend like somebody, like another human, or it could be like a bot?
Well, I think what occurs to me about this cartoon, I was reflecting on it, is that it's not clear to the mother whether or not, like, there's one way to interpret this cartoon where the mother just has no idea about technology and assumes that the girl can't possibly have any friends on the other side of her device, and that she's doing this mimicry, because that is what it looked. I mean, it's always curious to me that what we're doing on our phones looks the same to outsiders no matter what we're doing. We could be talking to a serial killer, like we could be talking to our mother, and it looks the same from the outside. So one way to interpret it is that the girl is actually play acting at texting, which is a thing. I know my niece has a fake cell phone that she, 2 years old, walks around with it. So that's one interpretation. But another interpretation is that there's something imaginary about all the people that we text with, even if there is a human on the other end, that there's a imagined component, because we're having to project so much of what's going on with them onto our limited conversation. So I think the scene reads in two ways.
Yeah, that somehow like social media friends are not real in some sense, right? Even if they're real people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah,
guess
and
like
this is,
some of
go
my
ahead.
sympathy is with the child who might feel that these are real relationships. And I think sometimes the other generations don't understand the realness that can result in connections over new technologies.
True. Yeah, I mean, it's an open question, right? Like whether, I mean, it seems that social media has helped us tremendously during the pandemic to be less lonely, right?
Yeah.
So it's hard to kind of take a very strong position on these things, for or
Mhm.
against. Okay, so that was the biggest part. What are we afraid of? Now we go to the, this question about whether the fears are a projection of our human inadequacies. And I think this was a theme already in what we discussed, but now we're going to look at some cartoons that maybe dig a little bit deeper into that. And the first one is, um, I would say my fear of killing plants, which is very common, and not being able to take care of them. This is at least what this cartoon of yours uh, evokes in me. Is that the intention?
I think I was thinking about the irony of sort of what we make more complicated when it comes to technology. You know, like the plant could just be right outside, but instead it's inside and connected to solar panels. So that was what I was getting at. And I think like our relationship between technology and the natural world and whether or not the two are supporting each other is sort of an inadequacy that a lot of these cartoons are tapping into. Yeah.
Yeah, so this one, I like this one because to me it's like kind of a nihilist position
Hmm.
about, the machines are just doing it all, so what's the point of learning, right?
Right.
It's a kind of
Right.
a defeatist position here. Is this the message, the main message?
Yeah. I mean, I think the kid is using this as an excuse, but it's a very powerful excuse, and that's what is disturbing about the cartoon. Yeah, like why learn? Why do my homework?
Yeah, and I think this one is maybe less, I think, less intelligent. This
That's
cartoon is less. It's more. It's just pure blame for
right, right.
machines. It has nothing to do with any kind of philosophical position about it.
Although it does tap into the robot as animals theme, you
Yeah,
know.
exactly. And it's the new excuse. But in it, I wanted to also like just raise this broader issue. Some of the uh, we could there's a lot of domains in which machines are going to be used in decision making, like in kind of high stakes domains, as they say, like for example, medical diagnosis and treatment, or judicial decision making, like sending somebody to prison or giving them parole and so on. And there's a risk that some people might be more likely to blame things on the machine, and that might detract from the blame to the person. So they do their job less, or they take whatever is they just always listen to the machine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you could then always blame the machine. So that's a
Mm-hmm.
concern.
Mm.
And so in terms of like inadequacies in this cartoon, it's more about like the fact that we're kind of maybe expecting too much from the machines.
Mm-hmm.
Like we ethical dilemmas about like, should the car kill three people or should it swerve and kill one person, are difficult. No two people don't agree on this, and so somehow we're expecting too much from the machines.
Right. No, I mean, this makes me think a lot about your moral machines experiment and the idea that some people have that you're somehow suggesting that this is a way to get to moral knowledge for the car, but that's actually not what the Moral Machines project is doing. It's just trying to pull sort of what our intuitions are, just as something to keep in consideration. And I think there are a lot of philosophical questions, ethical questions that we do not have good answers to. And that is very again, AI makes us confront that, that we don't know what to tell the
Yeah,
car what to do.
exactly. And this is about judicial decision making, and maybe also about the failure of justice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, a lot of people are afraid of putting robotic judges in power,
Mm-hmm.
but we're also not happy with the way that the justice system works in general. So this robot was more, at least the machines can be upgradable and fixable, right? There's like Senthil Mullainathan, who's a economist at Chicago, wrote this New York Times op-ed a few months ago saying, biased machines are easier to fix than biased people. That's like a fascinating and terrifying thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that resonates with me. I mean, in California, where I live, there was a recent ballot proposition that was voted down, which was advocating for doing away with cash bail, which is an extremely biased and unfortunate system, and instead using algorithms to deal with sentencing. And people's anxiety about algorithms using algorithms to deal with whether or not people should be kept in prison while they await their trials or not. So evaluating the risk. And people voted this down because there's so much anxiety about bias in algorithms, which is very legitimate. But unfortunately, the cash bail system is already so biased, so we're stuck with this bad system because of our anxieties about AI.
That's right. So I think like one of the difficult things, and I think something that has to be like right at the top of the agenda is to kind of calibrate our levels of anxiety so that we're anxious about the right things.
Yeah.
So we're not over anxious about machines or maybe trust them too much, right? So we don't want to err in either direction. And I think that's not trivial in many domains. And this one is a little bit absurd, but it's bringing this question to the fore of like, just careful not to blame the machine, not to anthropomorphize it too much. That there's always a human for the time being.
Yeah, and the fact that it I think it looks like a child, right, who's playing this game, again, taps into this sort of the ease with which we give children AI in order to act out their aggression.
That's right. So for the time being, AI is a tool, and it could be used to do cruel things as well. Okay, and this one is a little bit about like I guess our failure to figure things out. So here we've got like a robot president in the Oval Office. We have like different people who want different things. Fairness, efficiency, safety, we have different priorities. And often they can't be all simultaneously achieved, right? So we need to, and this is a problem that policymakers, as opposed to idealists, have to face, right? And I think that's another inadequacy that we're facing with machines, that we have to tell them what matters most, and that's on us. We have to figure it out.
Yeah, and also that we often do forget about the physicality of AI. That's another thing that this cartoon makes me think about.
Yeah.
I also really like that portrait of George Washington in the background.
Yeah, they're still there. Yeah, maybe I should have made a robot George Washington. That would be much further in the future.
Right.
Okay, here, yeah, I really like this cartoon of yours about smart reply. So yeah, so can you take us through this, the motivation behind it?
Well, first of all, Smart Reply is the project of my father's team at Google, so I just thought it would be fun to engage directly with one of his AI inventions that he's worked on. He's a fan of this cartoon. I mean, I guess this cartoon honestly like came out of just my feeling that, I mean, this might not be an obvious motivation, but my feeling that the digital world has created way too many, like more than I can handle, opportunities to engage with the world, which is kind of an interesting problem. That there's just like your phone is always asking for so much from you, and then the fact that like this algorithm Smart Reply would come up with would pick up on your, if it's really paying attention, would pick up on your sort of deep misanthropy and desire to be left alone because you're getting too many invitations to parties that you don't want to go to, which I realize is not really a problem anyone should complain about, but I don't know. I just really don't like holiday parties personally.
I mean, one thing that seeing this cartoon got me thinking about is that maybe the smart reply can just kind of tell me that, right? Like kind of help me understand my position and encourage me to, it's okay to say no, right? Like,
Right.
But I may not explain it this way, in this message itself, but I may just have a dialogue with myself, and this is helpful. So no,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah, I mean, another version of this cartoon that I did was a smart reply is reading Proust, and then all the answers were like these Proustian long sentences. That was another version of this cartoon, and just the idea that like the voice of AI is learning from something, and the humor in that.
So this one I really like.
This is my first cartoon published in the New Yorker.
Nice.
Another Google riff.
No surprise there. It's really good. I really like the play on the self-driving, self-conscious, self-actualized. So did you first think of those and then kind of come up with
I had this whole long list of self-blanking car, there was like, oh man, I can't even remember now. Self, huh. It's so long ago that I can't remember. You guys can riff on your own. All the different self-blanking cars that I came up with. And I had a fourth originally, and then the editor struck the fourth and told me that cartoons work best in threes. You get those three beats. But yeah, I think the idea of something being self-actualized, like that doesn't just mean consciousness, that they're like that actualization is like beyond consciousness. We talk a lot about consciousness in when we have these far future AI visions, but what does it mean to be actualized? It's not just to be aware of yourself, but to be deciding that you are going to do something that fits into kind of like a narrative or a story. And I think that's an interesting thing to add to this question about consciousness is like, when will AI think of itself as having a story of itself?
Yeah, it got me thinking that even if the car is not conscious, it's kind of like it could actualize its potential, like because the potential of the self-driving car is way more than just having no driver, but also being a place where, that being something that reduces pollution or, helps us not have to own cars and keep them parked, for most of the time. And, maybe become a place where people catch up and so on, like a new social space, whatever. There's so much potential that we still don't understand. We probably haven't even imagined yet.
Right.
Okay, so now we're getting to the last part, which is, can there be a happy coexistence? And these are more like, let's say, happier cartoons.
Should we just run through them
We're
without
running.
commentary
That's right.
to
So we
make
can have space for discussion and
questions?
Q&A. That's a
Great.
good idea. So, there's this notion of humans will always be special. So,
This one might need explaining, but
yeah. I mean, the way I saw it is that, we will have emotions, humans have emotions, machines will never have true emotions. And at least that's how
yeah.
I saw it.
I appreciate you putting this cartoon in there and explaining to me what I was trying to do with it. That was a good explanation.
And this one I really like, that there are things that machines will never be able to understand, like this reference.
Yeah, just the specificity of this one and the layers of references that you need to understand art history and
Exactly. But eventually, they will win the Turing test. They will be smart, but still they can do our chores, dangerous work. Maybe they wouldn't want to take over the world. They'll just enjoy the things that we enjoy, like this. And perhaps they will make our roads safer, especially if we don't use drunk teenagers in the training data. And
if we like clean up our act, then
Mhm.
they will follow suit. Yes.
Exactly. And finally, this idea that AI could be a moral superpower allows us to make decisions faster, more, including moral decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, this one, I think you need to explain this perhaps.
I mean, clearly I have a thing with this setup with the solar panel connecting to something. So, I mean, as a cartoonist, you're often thinking about these visual layers and how you can connect visual shapes. But
Yeah.
I think this is just my ultimate vision of the robot just enjoying itself and maybe being a model for us, how to just be self-sufficient and relaxed and enjoy the natural world.
It's great.